This is the Absolute Business Mindset podcast, created and hosted by Mark Hayward. I'm a corporate employee with an entrepreneurial mindset. This podcast will help and support you with new ideas about business. These are my thoughts, ideas, and comments. Today, we have Lynne Golodner, who is a writer, entrepreneur, and mother of four. Hello, Lynne. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today, Mark?
I'm very good. It's a very hot day today. We've had a really good early spring and summer in the UK. Although we've all been on lockdown, the weather's been pretty good. What about you?
Yes. It's getting warmer here in I'm in Michigan, and I actually have a really good friend in London. So we keep trading letters about the lockdown and how it is in the UK versus the US. But weird times we're in for sure.
Right. So yeah, we're now starting to open up. Monday was our first day where shops started opening up with social distancing. So yeah, we're starting.
Nice.
What's Michigan like?
So we've been opening up gradually, and it's really interesting because some people will be in masks and some people won't, and not all stores and businesses are open. But thankfully, even as a lot of states are seeing increases in case counts, we keep seeing it go down and down and down in Michigan, which I'm really grateful for. So our governor has been fantastic.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back to your degree. So tell me about your English degree at the University of Michigan.
Yes, so I'm a big Michigan fan. I have a degree in English and communications. And then I also did a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, focusing on poetry from Goddard College in Vermont.
Okay.
And my intention was to figure out a way to get paid to write. That was really just my earliest goal. And it's kind of still my goal in a lot of ways. But right after I graduated from Michigan, I moved to New York City. I started work as a journalist and spent a year there and then a few years in Washington, D.C. And I came back to Michigan in the late 1990s, still working as a journalist, which is really what I did until about 2007. So I was a journalist for a good 15 years.
So why did you move to New York? Was it that there was a job there, or was there an ambition to go to New York?
I guess I would say both. So I had an unpaid internship waiting for me, which was a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And I had a cousin I could live with, so I could afford to do that. But I had a mentor who was a full-time writer in New York City. And she said, if you want to be a writer, as soon as you graduate, come to New York. And so I did. And I just thought, I'm going to meet writers. She held a writing workshop in her apartment in Greenwich Village every Tuesday night. And I went religiously the whole time that I lived there. I was the youngest person there and met New York Times writers and authors, novelists, and was really humbled by the experience. But it really boosted my confidence in my writing and helped me to get published in a lot of places.
Wow, that's really impressive that you got into a community which was with quite experienced writers.
Yeah, so I have been very I always persevere. That's just been a characteristic of mine. I'm sort of persistent to a fault. And then I can be humble as well. So I can, sort of apologize for pushing forward so much. And I learned early on that if I ask people for advice or to sort of mentor me, that appeals to the ego. And then I gain wonderful insights and I just show lots of gratitude. And so the unpaid internship 6 weeks later turned into a paid first job. And I eventually moved from a cousin's apartment to an apartment with a woman that I had grown up with since middle school. And we just plodded along and worked. And it was really a fun time to be there. And then my newspaper transferred me to their Capitol Hill bureau. So I was writing about domestic politics and legislation in Washington. And then eventually got another job with another newspaper in DC. But, my whole family's in the Midwest. And I realized, when I was growing up, I couldn't wait to get out of Michigan. And then as soon as I left, I'm like, oh, I miss home. So I was excited to come back and see, relatives. And it's a little bit of a calmer pace in the Midwest than it is on the East Coast of the US. And so when I moved back, I, had about 4 years of journalistic experience in big cities under my belt. And my mentor in New York had taught me how to freelance. And so I really was scrappy and had lots of extra assignments. And that's also when I did my Master of Fine Arts in Writing. And so my first book was published upon graduation. It was my master's thesis, which was a manuscript of poems. And so that was my first published book. So that was pretty cool. So by 26, I had my first book. I had been published in national magazines and newspapers, lived in the big cities, and I was ready to pack up the car and move back home and have a little bit of a quieter life at that point.
Just on talking about mentors and how you found a mentor, I thought that was really interesting what you just said about asking people to be mentored, because there's to an element there's an ego side of that, but equally on the other end of it, hugely grateful, huge gratitude to the people that have helped you along the way. I think that's a really powerful message. Just talk a little bit more about that. How was that something that your mentor told you, or was it something part of your approach to, maybe inspired by family or friends?
I don't know where I first learned it, but I do know the way that I found my first mentor in New York was, and maybe she wasn't my first, maybe college professors were, or, I was always asking people, for advice and what can you teach me? And maybe it was even high school. I don't remember when that concept first hit me, but it was my aunt had a friend who was friends with the woman in New York. And she said, call this woman. And I did, I shamelessly called her. She was from Michigan originally, and
Okay.
she came home every summer to visit her parents. And so when she was in town, I called her, and she was a stereotypical New Yorker, like very gruff and to the point and almost abrasive,
Yeah.
but like, do this, goodbye, And so she said, move to New York. And I'm like, okay. And so I just, was, 20 years old, 21 years old. And I'm like, okay. So I did. And, like I said, I had relationships. So like my parents had friends there. I had a cousin I could live with. So having an unpaid internship was really not a big deal because I could prove myself in that job
Mm.
and, and really move ahead. But like my senior year of college, I'll tell you, I've said this so many times. I sent out 100 letters of application to newspapers and magazines around the country.
Wow.
And I think I got 95 rejections. And so I had maybe 5 interviews, and one of them was the one that was the unpaid internship.
Mm.
And then I was hired as a reporter there. And so it was a trade magazine, trade newspaper. So it wasn't glamorous. It was about metals and mining, and the things I know about nickel and cobalt and ferroalloys and steel would just bore you to death. But I realized that I was writing and I could speak to interesting people, and I'm really good at interviewing. And so I just sort of, pushed my way forward. And so, this mentor really helped me. And the irony is that years later, when I had my first book of poetry published, my mentor in New York, who was like 10 or 11 years older than me, had not had a book published. And she wrote a ton of poetry in addition to her journalism. And so I introduced her to my publisher, and they published her first book. So it goes around, And so one of the things that I tell people over and over again is that, the relationships are everything, and that's what moves you forward. And so anybody who is generous enough to give you time and listen to you, you thank them up and down. Like even today, I write handwritten thank you notes. I'll send a gift. I have 2 mentors that have been with me now for, I don't know, 20 years each. One I met at the Iowa Summer Writers Workshop when I was in my 20s, and I was in one course, but then I went to lectures every day, and I just went up to her. She was a magazine editor at the time. And I said, can I pay you to edit my essays? They're not getting published. I don't know why. And she charged me like $10 a page and just spent hours with a red pen. And I'm like, are you sure $10 a page is enough? And we have been friends now for probably 20 some years and maybe longer. And I'll still call her and ask for advice. And she's given me advice on parenting because she's a little older than me, that I'll do anything for her, anything I can. And then there's another guy who owns Zingerman's, which is a really cool food business in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I interviewed him for an article in, I think it was 2005, 2006, something like that. And then I thought about pivoting my career, and I wanted to start a business. So I said, can I meet with you for coffee? And, drove up to him and said, I want to start this business. What do you think? And he gave me tons of advice and invited me to take part in this course he did on becoming an entrepreneur. And he's still my mentor, but I've done things for him. I've given him free, marketing insights on some of his businesses. And we've worked together over the years, and he's just a fantastic person. So when I come into contact with someone that I admire, I'll soak it up and I'll show them how grateful I am. And it just sort of becomes a, lifelong relationship, which is so valuable. I hope I'm in both directions.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually got a question a little bit later on about your view of building relationships. So we will come into delve a little bit more into that. Um,
Awesome.
so you were a freelance writer. How difficult was it for you at that stage to find work? And have you got any advice to people if they are looking for freelance work?
Yeah. So my story about how I became freelance is kind of fun. So if you don't mind, I'll indulge a
Yeah.
little bit. But so when I moved back to Michigan, I worked at a local newspaper for a couple of years, and I was the editor of a section for people in their 20s at the time, and it was really fun. But I wasn't paid that much, and I wanted to freelance, and so a local newspaper offered me an assignment for a few $100s, and I went to my editor and said, "Do you mind if I do this? I'll do it in off hours at night or whatever." And he said I wasn't allowed to, and it wasn't anything that was a conflict of interest, or would not be a topic we would cover in our newspaper.
Mm.
So I said, all right, fair enough. And I put myself in a position to be able to leave that job and go freelance. And what I did was I put together a proposal and said, I've created this section that I do for you every week. It's 10 to 15 pages in the newspaper, and I manage the whole thing, and I will continue to do that on a freelance basis for this amount of money per month. What do you think? And the truth is, at the time, I thought it was a ton of money, and it was way less than they were paying me without any benefits or anything. So it was a great deal for them. And they said, sure, no problem. And I had them sign a year-long contract, which was a nice, cushion, like a safety net. And I left and I worked from home. And then I could take on the freelance assignment that one editor gave me. And I just, I wanted the potential to be the boss of my own time. So if it was a beautiful day, I wanted to go outside in the middle of the day and see what it was like instead of being tied to a desk by somebody else's rules. Of course, the irony is the first year that I was freelance, I think I worked from like 7 a.m. to like 11 at night. I mean, I think I was in sweatpants the whole time, but I tripled my income, which shows how little I was making. And it was really because I continued that one contract, but then I networked and I met other editors, and I was just scrappy, and I said, give me assignments. And there were some that were, way underpaid, and I just took them to prove myself and build those relationships so that I could move up and up and up in pay. And so I was a freelance journalist for 10 years.
Right.
And during that time, I bought a house when I was single. I got married. I started having kids, and I still was freelancing. And I found that I really did well because I did a couple of things. So one was I built relationships with editors, and I was very open to feedback. And so I had, great ideas that I would pitch them, but I was open to them morphing the ideas in different directions. And I took the feedback and the editing so that my assignments could improve, and they found me to be valuable. I always was early for deadlines, which they really appreciated. So I was never delayed. I always gave them what they asked for and more. And I kept that relationship going. I stayed in front of them, so they may have given me one assignment, but I didn't like wait for them to come again. I kept in front of them so that they wouldn't forget me. And I also, every year, I went to some kind of professional development opportunity to continue developing who I was. So that was usually a writers conference, like that Iowa Summer Writers Workshop was one of them. But I would find a way to go somewhere where I could meet editors and I could work on my craft. And so sometimes the trip would just be to go to New York City and set up interviews, like introductory interviews with editors at big magazines that I wanted to break into. And I would just say very humbly, I just want advice. I just want to know how to pitch you. And so they would meet with me for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I'd write thank you notes and, that kind of thing. One year I went to Des Moines, Iowa, which is the middle of nowhere. And it's either really cold or really hot all the time. And I went there because there are a ton of amazing magazines in Des Moines, and the Meredith Corporation is based there. And I showed up, and I knew one editor and said, can you introduce me around? And he set up, interviews with everybody. And everybody said, why are you here in Des Moines? And I said, I'm here to meet you. And they were so blown away that they couldn't wait to give me assignments, which was great, but like, I was investing in myself. I spent money on a plane ticket. I stayed in a hotel. And that was a cost I was eating, but I looked at it as an investment in my career, and it always paid off. So if you're willing to work hard, if you're creative, if you're, looking at being of value, then absolutely you can make it as a freelancer, but you have to put your nose to the grindstone to get it done.
That's a really inspiring story. And I think we keep on coming back to building relationships, working with people, listening to other people, as well as talking to other people as well. I think it's a really strong, powerful message, because I don't think it's just in freelance. I think it's in every aspect of business. You need to build relationships, and the longer the relationships, you never know where you might bump into them further down the
Absolutely.
line. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. So you became the Chief Creative Officer and owner of You People LLC. Tell me a little bit about that.
So, Your People was, I guess I would say, like my second entrepreneurial endeavor, the first being the freelancing, if you could call it that. But in '07, '08, when we were here having a huge recession in America, and a lot of magazines and newspapers were closing up. So all of my bread and butter clients were just sort of disappearing. I was also going through a divorce. I had three children who were ages 1, 3, and 5, and I needed to figure out how to keep my house and feed the kids and stay afloat. And so I started to think about, what are my skills? What does the marketplace need? And this is when Facebook was getting really big and popular. And I was noticing this trend of people having sort of an illusion of connection, where they thought they were connecting because it was digital, it was online, but they were behind a screen. And so they ended up being lonelier than ever. And so there was this void, this loss of, people wanting to have human interaction, but really doing it from a distance. And so I put all of this together, my communication skills, my knowledge of media, what I was seeing happen in the marketplace. And I realized that companies also, we have everything we need. There's plenty of competition. Why should we choose one company over another? So I put all this together, and I created Your People. And I went to a local grocery company that is family owned. And I had done a lot of food writing when I was a journalist. And I approached the CEO and I said, I think I could help you. I think I could, help tell stories about why you do what you do and how you do what you do, and build deeper relationships with your customers, and they'll come to you more, and it'll be a win-win. And because if people are so lonely and they're distant in their communication, and someone in the grocery store says, hey, how are you today, and they fill that void in an authentic way, you're going to win a loyal customer. So anyway, this hunch totally paid off. And it became marketing and public relations. I didn't know what I was creating at the time. I was just like, somebody pay me and I'll do well. But it's become marketing and public relations, and I've done a lot of training to sort of pivot my journalism skills since then. But when that CEO asked me, can you pitch media? I'm like, yeah, I've been doing it for 15 years. I'm doing it from another side. And I felt like I was crossing over to the dark side a little bit, being a journalist, going to PR.
Yeah.
But then I realized I still get to write and everybody's happy. So, it's a win-win. And so that's how Your People was born. And it's been 13 years now.
Fantastic. And it's a partnership. Who are the people that you in your partnership with?
Well, I'm the sole proprietor, so I own the company, and then I have a small team of people. So I have a web developer, graphic designer, a media relations specialist, and I also hire some contractors to help with some of the different tasks like social media and other things as well. So we're pretty nimble. We all work from home. There's just 2 years of those 13 years that we had an office. And it's a strategic move because I really like that freedom. And I like working from home, being able to focus my life around my kids. And so yeah, so it's pretty cool. I have people all over the country who do work for me.
Amazing. So we've touched on you mentioned about Facebook. So for communications, we're just going to move to one of the later questions. So it's relevant. So for communications, how has social media changed the approach for businesses? So I'll repeat the question. So for
Yeah.
comms, For communications, how has social media changed the approach for businesses?
It's a really interesting question because in the early years of my business, people would come to me and say, if you just get me on Facebook, I know my business will grow. And I would say, I'll get you on Facebook, but you need to do way more than that for your business to grow. And so I've always said that you have this toolbox that helps you to grow your business. And social media is one tool in the toolbox. And so, and it can be a rabbit hole. I mean, I have a lot of fun with social media and I love creating different graphics and content for clients and things like that. But you could waste all your time on social media and you still have to have, I believe, interaction on three levels. So one is in the digital sphere, you need to be where your customers are, and social media is one of those places. And that means you need to really determine which platforms are useful for you. Where should you invest your time and resources? But then you also need to do what I call print, which are things you can tangibly hold in your hands, marketing materials, newspapers, magazines, advertisements, things like that. And then you also need to have that human to human in person component. And I think people are really missing that. So, what has happened with social media is that we think that's where we need to be because everybody's going to discover us that way. And we forget about the in person. So,
Mm.
if you do all three, I believe you'll set yourself up for great growth. But if you leave out one of those pieces, I think you're going to limp along.
And the human interaction, I think, is something that a lot of people have either forgotten or don't think is relevant, and they forget the importance of being able to reach out to the human person and create relationships with them.
Absolutely. Well, I always say people do business with people. And so even if you have a huge multinational corporation, ultimately, at the end of the day, that transaction is a human to a human.
Mm.
And so your brand has to have a human persona. You have to appeal to the human frailty in all of us. So when somebody finds your website at 2 in the morning, what's keeping them up at night? What are they worried about? How can you provide reassurance? So it has to be a human to human relational connection if you want that brand to really make a difference and draw loyal customers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the core of all marketing is the human relationship.
Yeah. So how do you split your PR and marketing in your business?
Ah, that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I do. I think that they're sort of all interwoven, and I feel like, um, you know, what we call PR sometimes is marketing, sometimes marketing's PR. So I just lump it all together. And so when I work with a client, my preference is to begin with an audit of what they're already doing and assess what's working well and where there's opportunity, and then assess their story. And so we come up with their foundational narrative. So what is the origin story? What is the mission? What is the vision? What words are we going to use and concepts to attract people, and then we're going to use them consistently in all communications efforts. And that storytelling development can take a couple of months, and then from there we build the strategy. And so the strategy is your big roadmap, and it's all the different tasks and activities that are part of your marketing mix, and then you start to implement them. And so public relations is part of that marketing mix, and I would say maybe media outreach, social media, blogging, e-blasts like newsletters, those might be more public relations, I would say, whereas marketing is the overall strategy and big picture look at it, but it also includes sales and advertising,
Yeah.
which I don't necessarily include in public relations.
Yeah.
But again, they sort of spill into each other too.
Yeah. So what type of businesses do you attract at your company?
Well, we've gone through a few different niches over time. And in the early years, we did a lot of yoga and wellness businesses. And there was a period of time where we were focused a lot on nonprofits. All the while, we've had entrepreneurs and startups who are really out of the box, very unusual and unique. And then over the past couple of years, a niche that I've really been developing is education clients. And so now we work primarily with schools and universities, any kind of organization that promotes education, and also municipalities. So, and they kind of go hand in hand, especially with public school systems. So, I really love working in that education space, and we're just scratching the surface. So I'm excited to develop that further and draw more education clients our way.
Okay, excellent. And how do you attract the ideal audience? So your ideal client or your ideal audience for your client, how do you do that sort of analysis for them?
So how do I attract them to us, or how do
No,
I help them attract their
how do
ideal?
you attract them for their audience, for their?
Yeah. So the first thing is to really articulate with laser sharp focus who your audience is. And that's a very hard thing to do. So there are people who are like, anybody could be my client. And maybe that's true, but it's really hard to attract everybody.
Mm,
And so when you can dial in a niche and you understand demographic, psychographic, geographic areas,
yeah,
what is their pain point? What are they looking to fix? How can you, solve that? So that conversation is super important to come up with that audience profile, and
mm,
then understand where they are. And so you need to be where they are. So that might mean social media. It might mean you need to do speaking engagements to certain associations or organizations, or be in person where they are. But then also writing articles, so opinion pieces, op-eds,
mm.
for publications either in that industry or in the geographic area where they're going to see you. And then also pitching you to media. That's really important because you're coming across as a thought leader. And so all of these different things are ways that you sort of set yourself up to attract that audience once you know who it is. You've got to know first and foremost. That's the most important thing.
And do you agree that when they're starting off, niches, to go to a niche is a good place, and you can broaden out the further you go along, but doing a niche initially for a small business is really important.
I think it's brilliant. And I think even a big business needs to niche down. So I have a friend who is a brilliant entrepreneur, and she specializes in social media management. And she decided this year only to do LinkedIn. So she's in the past worked with clients on their Facebook and their Instagram and different things. And she just said, I like LinkedIn the best. That's where I am the most. And that's the only way I'm going to work with people.
Yeah.
No, she's a solopreneur, but so it's easy to do that. But I think it's brilliant and brave of her to
Mm,
just say, this is my area of expertise. And so if you want help on LinkedIn, you need to go to her.
yeah.
And she's kept incredibly busy because this is her niche, and everybody knows it. She knows it by like with her eyes closed.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to niche. And I think that the more you can do it, the better off you're going to be, and the more clients you're going to have, ironically.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Um, so, so you mentioned a bit earlier on about storytelling. So,
Yes.
how important is storytelling for branding?
Well, it's everything. I mean, you have to have a compelling story that pulls at the heartstrings and that is consistent. And usually it draws from your origins, it starts there. And so, why was this company created? Why do you do what you do? What's the passion behind it? Some kind of inspirational so what that you can offer to people. But we live by story. I mean, from our youngest days, everything is story. Think about, parents reading to children at night,
Mm,
and helping them to feel comfortable enough to sleep, and going to the theater, going to movies, whatever it is. Like we really like have a hunger for story. And so it makes perfect sense that businesses would be storytelling as well. And we're in an age where, Seth Godin, the marketing guru, talks
yeah,
about the connection economy,
yeah,
and stories are the currency. And it's absolutely true. But we're at a time where there's so much to choose from that if a company doesn't have a compelling story, there's no reason we would choose them.
mm,
And so a lot of the corporate storytelling that you're seeing nowadays I mean, frankly, you see it at Nike, you see it at Lululemon, you see it at some of the coffee companies. It's about the kind of quality of life, the kind of character you want to build. It's the why are we here, the meaning of life. That's the kind of storytelling that they're doing. And then when you think about that, I mean, you're buying a pair of leggings. It's not necessarily, going to transform your soul, but
yeah.
the messaging suggests that it will. And it's because we're looking for that. We're yearning for that higher connection. And so a brand needs to live it and really represent it if they're going to attract people who want that.
And I've just taken a note here because I've spoken to quite a few people who consider themselves good salesmen, and they always talk about sales and emotions. You need to
Uh-huh.
sell to people's emotions. I think brands also part of their branding should be creating an emotion for for wanting to buy from Apple or from
Yes.
Starbucks or wherever it is. So I think using people's emotions is a very powerful tool as well.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because, we're big fans of Starbucks, even though I don't really like the coffee. And my daughter today was out early this morning and she went to Dunkin' Donuts and she got coffee and she came home and she said, it's just so delicious and it's even better than Starbucks. But we always go to Starbucks and I think it's the storytelling.
Yeah.
And so she had forgotten that Dunkin' Donuts was there and she was so glad she drove by and stopped to get a coffee because she liked the flavor better. But the branding is definitely superior at Starbucks. And so they're pulling us in and we want to be part of something. It's interesting. Years and years ago when Starbucks was just getting popular, a friend of mine who was a journalist at the Detroit Free Press, and he wrote about religion. He wrote about Starbucks as the new church, and it was the most brilliant article I've ever read. But it was about this sense of community and belonging and like where you worship, and so it had nothing to do with the coffee. And I'm like, that is so spot on. It's absolutely the story that they're saying.
And I think a lot of the brands, things like Apple, Nike, Starbucks, all those really big global companies, their branding is so strong and their storytelling is so strong that you buy into. So in the UK, if you're buying trainers, you invariably buy Adidas or Nike, and
Right.
and for coffee, you're buying Starbucks. We've got Costa over here, which is a British
Uh-huh.
company, but
Okay.
you almost go into two camps. It's actually like when you initially think of that, how divisive it can actually be. It's actually very powerful because that sort of competition one against one can
Yes.
create great brand loyalty, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about Coca-Cola and Pepsi,
Yeah,
like and sometimes it's just a flavor thing, but there really is a brand element that makes you feel a part of it. And there's such deep loyalties.
yeah,
If you look at Nike, I mean, I remember I think the 80s is when the Just Do It campaign came out. It's very simple, and that's what makes it so powerful. And it's endured for decades.
yeah.
But this concept of just do it is a motivation, the imagery that went with it, and it's evolved over time, has really been about principles and integrity and aspiring to a greater state of being. And it's so unbelievably simple. And that's one thing that I talk with clients about a lot. So we work with schools primarily that have these long winding mission statements that don't really say much,
Yeah.
and I'm like, we need to make it really tight, like one sentence as a mission statement. And this is painful for the faculty who've like labored over paragraphs and paragraphs, and I'm like, what do you want to be? What are you trying to do? That's what your mission is, and it needs to be really brief and simple to be powerful.
Mm.
So writing tight is harder than long elaborate stories, but that's how you connect with people and that's how you really pull them into what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I do I'm involved in sales and in my role, and it's really interesting because from a sales point of view, you need to have your elevator pitch, you need to have your, let's say, like a mission statement, you need to have your one page of marketing materials, and you need to be well versed in all across all, depending on what audience it is. It's very much, I would imagine it's very much like that with branding. You've got to have something tight that that's authentic, that's that you can then sell to your, whether it's in education, it's I suppose it's selling to the students and the parents as well. But it's really
Sure.
important to have those different building blocks to be able to talk
Absolutely.
to whatever audience you're talking to.
Yeah, so I'm actually teaching a course right now called What's Your Story? And it's a 21-day workshop where people in the course get a prompt every day. And they start with their personal pursuits, their personal meaning, and they end up with a story that they can offer if they're looking for a job or they're trying to promote their company or that kind of thing. And we really try to get from like writing big and free writing and seeing whatever comes up to really, really tight by the end of 21 days. And it's interesting to see what breakthroughs come through because people will say things, like I stand for this or this is what I do, and nobody knows what they're talking about. And so you have to get it to that point of relatability so you know what you represent, but it makes sense to anybody who's hearing you. I remember once I had a colleague who's a brilliant videographer, and he says, I have a storytelling agency, and nobody knew what he was talking about. And so I could say I have a storytelling agency, but what he and I do are completely different.
Mm.
And so you have to really be crystal clear in what it is that you offer and how you do it differently than anybody on the planet.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do that. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're a fellow podcaster as well. You've been doing it for nearly 2 years, I think. So tell me a little
Yes.
bit about it. What was your inspiration to start doing a podcast?
So, okay. Ever since I've been a journalist, I've written about how people find meaning, and I like to say how they find meaning in the mundane. So just very ordinary people living extraordinary lives.
Mm.
And I think that's been a theme through all the different articles I've written over time. And it's been fascinating to me to meet people and understand why they do what they do and how they got to where they are. And so I don't know when I decided to podcast. I just decided I wanted to get back to finding those story meaning. And it's something that I've always pondered, why am I doing this work and what was I put here to do and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to explore that with other people. I launched the podcast on my father's 80th birthday, July 9th, 2 years ago, 2018. And he had been diagnosed the year before with an acute form of leukemia that was incurable. And so he was my first interview. And he was an entrepreneur who was just a pretty ordinary guy living an extraordinary life. And we were very close. He passed away a few months ago. But I really did that to capture his stories and to, he's always been my inspiration, my biggest business advisor. And so I started with him, and I actually learned things about him that I didn't know in that interview. So even though we've spent my whole life talking and we were super close, I learned more. And then on the 1 year anniversary of the podcast, because the treatments did work for a while, he was my guest again. And it was around the time of the anniversary of D-Day. And my dad was a big history buff. And so he had been to Normandy and seen all of the battlefields and everything. And so we talked about that as well as about him and the progression of all these things. And so, yeah, we're coming up on the second anniversary, the 2 year anniversary, July 9th of this year. And we are at, I think, 83 episodes now. So we published every week for a while, and then we went back to every other week because it was exhausting and I want to market more of it. So I would love anybody to listen to the Make Meaning podcast.
Yeah.
You can find it anywhere and everywhere. And we're always looking for great guests and just, how people find meaning and then live their lives from a sense of purpose. And
that's a really interesting sort of concept. So sort of finding meaning in the mundane. So do you mean that as in everyday lives that you might know someone who's a plumber, who's a teacher, but actually exploring their story on what makes them extraordinary?
Absolutely. What makes their life special? Where do they find meaning? Is it, taking walks in the woods? Is it being with their grandchildren? Is it, do they do pottery on the side? I mean, what is it that marks their time on earth? Because I really believe that everybody's here for a purpose, and we spend our lives trying to figure out what that purpose is. And so it's sort of my quest to figure that out, and I think when we figure it out is probably when we're done. So it's a nice journey that we get to explore for all these decades. But it's really trying to understand, who is this person and why are they here and what is their unique contribution to the community and to the world? How are they different from everybody else? And so there are just amazing stories out there. I mean, just phenomenal. So I have loved every episode that I've done, and I would love to hear from you because you're an expert podcaster. So tell me what you think. But it's like it's probably my favorite thing to do. I love doing my podcast.
So on my podcast, I do it because I just genuinely love doing it. I started the first 60 episodes. I just did solo stuff. So I just my thoughts, ideas, readings, whatever it was, documenting my life a little bit as well. So I spent a considerable period of time doing solo stuff. And then from about 60 onwards, I'm now, I think I'm about 180 something, 5 or 6. I think I'm on. I started doing interviews and just really sort of fell in love with hearing people's stories to their success, whatever success means to them.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a passion project completely.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would still do it if so I've sort of upped my game. I'm now doing about 4 or 5 podcasts a week because of,
Oh my gosh.
well, they're only short podcasts. So a lot of my stuff is just short, 5-10 minutes, because I'm doing a series on working from home, because
Uh-huh.
for people it's so relevant, and I'll do it until we don't work from home or things change. So
Mhm.
that made me up my game a lot, and I do one podcast, which is an interview a week, and that gets
Uh-huh.
released on a Sunday evening. So for me, I just love hearing people's stories about, like, so what I said to you at the start, I'll go back to your degree. What did you do
Yeah.
for your degree? And you can see, or I can see, that you doing an English degree has really shaped where you've gone from a writer, journalist, a freelancer to marketing, PR, which is all comms and
Yeah.
writing in itself. So sometimes you get these people like you that have been, it's been a constant drive throughout your career to have some sort of writing. Sometimes you get people that did something very, very abstract and then came. So I had one person who did a philosophy degree, but then got into
Uh-huh.
business and was able to work out the logic of philosophy
Yeah.
actually meant there's a logic in his business as well. So this is
Okay.
why I love doing the interviews, because it's just, you just get these stories of people making these changes and making these through their lives, and so for me it's just absolutely fascinating to hear
Well,
that.
I could learn a lot from you because you've further ahead than I am in this. But it's my journalistic skills and my unbridled curiosity that leads me to want to probe and ask questions and
Yeah,
just learn from people.
yeah,
But it's interesting because I do believe that we're each here for a reason, and I wish we had those conversations with teenagers so that they were empowered to make choices for university and then for career
yeah.
from that place of purpose. But I don't think we do. And I know that, I remember my parents were always very supportive of me, but when I said I wanted to do an MFA in writing, my dad was like, I'll pay for law school, which is like 4 times as much. And I'm like, just pay for the MFA, dad, which he did, which was nice. But but it was because he was concerned. He wanted me to have, I mean, who has a job as a poet? Like nobody. So, and I've done pretty well for myself, but it's not as guaranteed as having a law degree. And so when we make those choices, it's, well, how am I going to pay my bills and how am I going to live the life I want to live? As opposed to this place of like, what am I uniquely positioned to do? What does the world need from me as opposed to the next person? And that's kind of what I'm doing now. Like the Make Meaning podcast was the impetus for me to launch this Make Meaning movement. And that's how I'm trying to work with people to try to figure out, what is your meaning? And then how do you make decisions from that place? And it's not that hard to get back there. It's like something that lives inside of us from when we were little, when we did things that we just did because they were fun and they were natural and they came automatically to us. And it's where our skills were, because you just didn't have to have these obligations and these burdens. And then we sort of tucked it away when we had to start studying and
Yeah.
getting more practical and that kind of thing. But I think that that's who we are at the core. And if we came from that place, it might be a very different world. So
I, I
that's where I'm at now.
I 100% agree, and we can talk a little bit about the movement. So
Yeah.
I find it fascinating to think about. So the reason why I do my podcast is that I never had a mentor in my 20s to really help me uh,
Okay.
make good choices. And
Okay.
so when I found myself a mentor, was helped to get a mentor, and he basically was a game changer in business for me, absolutely game changer. And so a lot of the stuff that I do here in my podcast, I'm hoping that 20-year-old who doesn't know what they're doing and why do they need to do it, and should I become an entrepreneur, should I have a corporate job, should I go into journalism, whatever it is, they are being supported in, I know it's digitally, but being supported to think about those sorts of decisions, because as you say, it's so important for people to understand what's important to them, what their values are, what do they believe in, and these are the things which you should be making your life choices, rather than, oh, I should do a law degree because my dad tells me I should.
I'll make more money, right? I mean, because ultimately, if you're not happy doing it, then you burn out at some point, and you look back and you say, "Wow, I've just wasted 20 years or whatever it is." And I do think, I mean, I think in the UK and Europe, people are a little bit more balanced than in the US. Like I have a really good friend who's originally from Dublin, but she's lived in London for about 25 years now. And when she started her first job, she started with 6 weeks of paid vacation time, not including bank holidays and things like that. Whereas I think I had 1 week, and that was like, I held on to it really tightly because it's all 5 days. And that's standard in America. Like everybody just works to the bone. And I don't think it's healthy. And I just don't think the quality of life is there. And I never want to be that person who looks back and says, I wasted all these years in the wrong direction. I have 4 kids now, they're teenagers, and they're awesome people, and they're about to fly the coop. And so I want to spend time with them. And so my work needs to give me that freedom to be able to, take a hike with one of my sons when they're willing to do it, or, bake with my daughters or whatever it is, because this is what makes a life. I mean, this is really what, gives us the quality.
So I think London is probably more like the US than the rest of Europe, I would say. I've got some friends from Greece and from France and Spain and Italy, and they definitely have a different pace to life. You were talking about from New York to Michigan.
Sure.
London, especially, so I've been in the corporate world for 14 years, and there is work-life balance is actually quite hard to master in these sorts of corporate environments, I would say. I suppose entrepreneurship as well, it can be quite challenging as well. So yeah, I think the one thing that I always ensure is that I have some time off, whether we go somewhere. Obviously with the lockdown we've not been able to go very far, but have some time with my kids and my family to prioritize them, because a lot of my time I have to prioritize other things. So for me, having breaks, having holidays with family is incredibly important. So
well, yeah, I mean, and Europeans really travel for longer than we do. So if we take a week-long vacation, that's considered long.
Right.
And my friends in Europe and in England are 2 weeks minimum, and I don't know the last time I did a 2-week vacation. I think it was out of necessity, because I traveled so far that it just took so long to get there that you had to stay for a while. But it was the exception, not the norm, and that's a problem. I mean, what is life about if we're just working all the time, right?
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about this movement. So it's the Making Meaning movement. I suppose we've covered it a little bit already, but just tell me a little bit, because I think it's important that we talk about this, because you're doing something really incredible.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, the Make Meaning movement grew out of the Make Meaning podcast. And my vision is to work with people to discover their meaning proposition, turn that into a story that they can use really nimbly and easily, and then use that to pivot. And so I've developed the Pause to Pivot worksheet, which I give out liberally and freely. So anybody who wants to email me because they heard me on this podcast, I'm happy to send it to them. But it's really about taking time. And a lot of people, because of the pandemic, have been forced to take the time, but giving yourself the gift of time to ponder, am I where I should be? And if not, how do I want to pivot? And then what do I have that I can purposefully do that and go in a direction that's better for me, and then of course for others. And so I'm working on, I have a few workshops that I've done. I do occasional Make Meaning hours over Zoom, where we talk about the meaning of money or why we work or things like that. And then this What's Your Story workshop, we're almost done with the first 21-day workshop. We'll offer it again. We'll do a Find Your Voice workshop, which I've done before. And I'm working on some bigger pieces. So I'm doing sort of like a 3-part series. The first one is the reimagining, which is the whole meaning, story, and what's next. And then a deeper dive into sort of starting up, like you want to start a company, let's map that out, let's get that going. And then the longest one is writing your book. And so anybody, whether they're a corporate leader or they're an entrepreneur, they have expertise to offer, let's work together to get that book out there and build that thought leadership for them so that they can make their mark and leave a legacy. So that's the vision.
Yeah. How long's your course for writing a book?
My vision is that it's going to be 12 months. Right. So we start with the outline, and then we do a deep dive into writing, and then we'll have some workshopping and revision toward the end. We'll talk a little bit about publishing and things like that too. I have 8 published books out, and so I've done that, and I'm working on the 9th, which is the Make Meaning book, which doesn't have a title yet, but my publisher is like breathing down my neck, so I have to get that revised into him so that it can be out by early 2021. So and it's basically just codifying everything that I just was talking about.
Amazing. All right, we're coming to the end of our conversation. So I ask everyone 5 questions, quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer, depending on what you want to tell me. So first one is, what's the best decision that you made?
Say it again. I'm sorry, you cut out.
What's the best decision that you've made?
Are you there? Did I lose you, Mark? I'm sorry.
Hold up.
Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. So the best decision that I made?
Yes.
The best decision that I made, deciding to work from home. Yep. Leaving the office when I had one for my company and deciding to work from home.
Awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
The best piece of advice that I've been given is to build relationships. So with all the mentors we talked about early on, just being open to learning from other people and not ever thinking that I know it all. I think that is the wisest thing I've ever done.
Right, I probably know the answer to this one, but I'll ask you, who's the person that's helped you most in your career? And you could maybe mention someone else, as we've talked quite a lot about your mentor.
Yeah. So for first and foremost, my dad. I mean, there's no question. So he was always my biggest mentor. But I would say the other mentors, I should shout out to them: Paul Saginaw from Zingerman's, Barbara Jones at Henry Holt Publishers, Susan Shapiro was that very first mentor in New York City, and I'm sure there are many, many others. So I'm sorry if I'm not naming you, but and my mom, actually, she would love to hear that, because she always said that, oh, I always go to my dad. But the truth is, she's got a lot of wisdom, and I am turning to her more and more, of course, in his absence, and that's quite a gift.
Good. Any regrets?
Any regrets? I do. I regret that I didn't live abroad. So I've traveled widely, but I went from college right to the workforce and, just plodded along. I've been working since I was 14 years old, my first part-time job, and I'm a little sick of it. I mean, I'd like to have a break. And so I've been encouraging my kids, take a gap year, do something like apprentice somewhere, travel, whatever it is. I don't know if they'll take me up on it, but when you can do it, because at a certain point you can't anymore.
Yeah. What are you most proud of?
I am most proud of my kids. I think I did a pretty damn good job raising them, and they're remarkable people, and I just think they're the coolest people to be around. So patting myself on the back there.
That's amazing. Right. Thank you very much for your time. The last thing is, where can people find you?
Yes, thank you. So I'm everywhere. You'll see me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. Makemeaning.org or yourppl.com are my 2 websites. There's also a lynnegolodner.com if you want to go there, but you'll find me at the other 2 as well. And please say hello, because I love meeting new people.
Wonderful. Okay, Lynne, thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing your story. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.